Welcome to the Renews Podcast with me, Stephen Dunn.
We need to be making a blade every 9 hours to hit the 2030 targets. It's currently taking us 36 hours. We need to be installing a turbine every day, taking us roughly 3 to 5 days. We need to halve consenting time. We need to build a whole new HVDC capability. And I think that's the role for the Catapult.
I'm joined now by our offshore wind editor, Paul Stephen. Paul, you were in Edinburgh on Thursday for the Offshore Renewable Energy Catapult Spotlight event. Can you tell us what your main takeaway was?
Absolutely. Well, I thought Ocean Wind's country manager, Adam Morrison, summed it up quite succinctly during one of the panel debates when he said, it's all about the projects. We had quite a lot of supply chain funding announcements that coincided with the show. The Crown Estate made a further round of awards from its Accelerator Fund. Great British Energy made a funding call for its £300 million offshore wind and networks funding pot. And we were also reminded by Tim Pick of one of the application deadlines coming up for the Offshore Wind Growth Partnership Administered Industry Growth Fund. But what was clear from speaker after speaker and many of those who I spoke to afterwards was that none of this will be enough in isolation without greater order certainty and pipeline certainty, which is where I felt most of the deeper concerns seem to lie.
Well, we have looming large over the conference, I'm sure, was allocation round 7, which is the results of which are just weeks away. Did the CFD round come up for debate or discussion at all, Paul?
It did indeed. As you'd expect, there was a lot of commentary around AR7 ahead of the results next month, and a lot of voices in Edinburgh that some Scottish projects in particular will need to clear the round. Deputy First Minister Kate Forbes said it will be a pivotal moment, not just for providing some capacity for suppliers to get their teeth into, but also for what she described as perception and sentiment, which I can only take as a reference to the whole UK government's net zero agenda coming under attack recently from critics. But also Great British Energy Chief Executive Dan McGrail perhaps went even further when he said that it would be a moment where we get to find out if the entire Clean Power 2030 mission is in sight, given that this will be one of the final opportunities to procure capacity that has a fighting chance to come online by the end of the decade.
Very good. And what other messages did you pick up in Edinburgh?
Well, perhaps unsurprisingly, ORE Catapult Chief Exec Steve Foxley was keen to fly the flag for innovation and testing, especially in floating wind, where the UK could become a global leader and land some significant economic prizes if this comes to pass. I sat down with him on the sidelines to hear more about Catapult's plans for 2026, but to also hear his reflections on the last 12 months, which were his first in the role since taking over in January.
We've done a nice thing actually last week. We've gone back and looked over what have been our highlights for 2025. And it's always one of those moments, isn't it, where you think, oh my God, didn't realise how much we'd done. And then you then put it into the backdrop of still quite a turbulent sector and market. We've been going through quite a lot of change ourselves. There's a lot of changes going through the innovation sector. And so actually I think, first reflection is actually very proud of what's been achieved in 2025 in those sort of background situations. And the one bit of innovation that I pulled out is I'm really pleased with this lifetime extension stuff we've been doing for RWE. I think that's really showing some key bits of innovation that the Catapult can drive that's really going to help. A really important question in the sector is what can we get out of these turbines? And now that we've just celebrated 25 years, what is the opportunity to get more life out of some of those original turbines? So that's probably the first reflections on 2025. Have my initial observations changed? I think definitely, yeah. Catapults I feel very comfortable with, the sector not so much. And I think literally every month I'm getting a little bit more insight into the offshore wind sector and how do we position the Catapult to be of the most service to what the sector needs. And for us, it's about, I think, doing less things, but going deeper into some of the big innovation challenges that we've got in the sector. To give you a couple of examples, We need to be making a blade every 9 hours to hit the 2030 targets. It's currently taking us 36 hours. Need to be installing a turbine every day. Between now and 2030, it's taken us roughly 3 to 5 days. We need to halve consenting time. We need to build a whole new HVDC capability, manufacturing, testing, installation, maintenance, monitoring. And I think that's the role for the Catapult, is those big disruptive innovation challenges, putting our shoulder to the wheel and putting the horsepower behind that. So I think the last 12 months have really helped sharpen where do we focus and what do we stop doing.
I suppose interesting times, well, for everybody in the sector, but particularly for ORE Catapult, there's obviously that maxim that through adversity comes opportunity. And I suppose this morning we've heard lots of people talking about it being a sort of pivotal moment, being at a juncture to do with pipeline and headwinds and all those sorts of things. But that's where I suppose the Catapult can play a role to try and plot a way forward, as Kate Forbes said this morning.
Where we feel really strong is that technology expertise in the sector. So helping to advise people like a GB Energy. And, we have put some of our best technologists into GB Energy to help them. The same with Crown Estate. Now with DSIT and Innovate UK, really making sure that everybody understands what are the critical innovation gaps in the offshore wind sector, and then how do we solve those? Because that's what we're competing against internationally, Europe, US, Asia, making sure that we're driving that world-class innovation here in the UK, because that's how we'll then create those companies that we've all been seeing today at Spotlight, but it's then also how we'll attract that global inward investment when they're comparing the UK to capabilities elsewhere in the world.
Yes, it's interesting what you say, because that sort of worked both ways, that both you've got the role to help UK PLC and enhance global competitiveness, but we've also seen technology come the other way, which we ought to talk about with Ming Yang, which I know is a sort of strategic move, which we talked about earlier in the year, that you'd been to China, you were talking to Asian manufacturers, but the fact that technology's coming this way into our shores and you're playing a role in sort of proving that and verifying it is quite interesting too, and maybe puts the Catapult in a slightly new ground in that area.
I think the role we're trying to take is that data-driven, evidence-based, delivery-focused. No surprise I'm an engineer, but gravitating to that sort of, all right, well, what does the data say? What are we looking at here? What's the problem? What are the options? And we all know we've got supply constraints. We're going to see it in 2026, but particularly around nacelles, that we just have not got enough supply capacity for meeting, one, UK's Clean Power 2030 targets, but also Europe's as well. So looking at it through that engineering lens, well, if that's the problem, if that's what the analysis is saying, how do you solve it? And our perspective is you are going to absolutely have to pull lever one, which is how can we help Siemens, how can we help Vestas, how can we grow capacity, how can we be more efficient, more productive? You're absolutely going to need to pull lever two, which is what are GE going to do in 2026? Are they going to come back into the market? Is that going to help with supply constraints? You then need to be looking at, do we need other Western capabilities as well? You then got the fourth leader, which is, should we be looking at Eastern OEMs? And our personal perspective is that when you look at the analysis and what we need to deliver for 2030, there is no single lever that's going to solve that. You're going to have to pull all four of them to try and hit that demand. And that's probably the reason why we went out to China, was to have a look at where is the technology. We're going to need solutions from all of the supply chain. And I think, if you look at the UK and China, they are the biggest offshore wind markets in terms of installed capacity, in terms of market. And so we think we need to look at that as an option, but also going with our eyes wide open. And one of the first questions that developers ask is, will the equipment meet European quality standards? Will it meet design life? And that's the piece of work that we are undertaking with Min Yang, is proving out one of the major components against what we expect in the Western market. And just recognise, we know there's a lot of geopolitics, we know there's a lot of other conversations around cybersecurity. We think step one is to look at the quality and the design life and get to the bottom of that.
Well, you're always very clear that you did the technology, not the politics, but I suppose the argument is that one will aid the other. It's about informing the decision makers rather than
I think so.
getting involved in the actual decisions.
I think so. I think standing still is not an option. I think we can absolutely help in our role, and we do this for all of the turbine OEMs, is help bring that evidence, that data, that qualification, that reassurance, that independent analysis. And I think in this situation we're in, which we've just talked about, I think it's the right role for us as Catapult to play.
Which brings us on nicely to sort of look into the future. It suggests from what you've said that this may not be the last involvement with East Asian OEMs, that there may be more similar tie-ups as part of that role that you've just outlined?
So we're not looking that far ahead yet. So I think we've got a clear piece of work that will take us a period of time to do that. We've already talked about what the other levers are. We'll see what happens in the next 3, 6, 12 months around those levers. And we'll then see what the best solution is for the UK to hit its Clean Power 2030 targets. But yeah, I think at the moment we're not thinking any further than the piece of work on hand.
But beyond that, beyond those time horizons...
Do you know what I've learned in the first 12 months? This sector changes fast, and you've got to be constantly adjusting as the market develops. So I think it's dangerous for me to look, beyond 2026. We're focused on what we're doing, and we think that's the right next logical step.
And before we move away from Mingyang completely, we had the announcement. I understand the bearings on its way to Europe, or will be shortly?
We're expecting it probably like Q1, Q2.
And then what does that testing programme look like? I mean, when do you start?
So all of our work that we do for all of our OEMs is how do we take warranty periods, how do we take design life, and how do we compress those into an accelerated period? So there's a variety of options on that particular project, and depending upon what final scope we go with, that will then determine the testing period. But for most of 2026, we'll be busy doing that.
And making full use of the expanded and enlarged facilities at Blythe.
Well, that's one of our nice reflections, is if you look at where Blythe is now in December, we've got a blade in the blade test facility. We're doing some interesting work there around new testing methodologies. Drivetrain facility utilised in 2026, and we're building the new 23 to 29 megawatt facility. We've just opened the new Technology Development Centre with Kim McGuinness, which is helping start-up businesses who want to get into offshore wind, maybe want to prove out their product at a lower scale before then going up to your 3 megawatts, your 15 megawatts and beyond, but also looking for export opportunities. And we've also received some funding recently from the Mayoral Combined Authority around pre-qualification for cables, really important for that part of the country as well, maybe making sure we're able to support their future products and development in the cable sector. So we've just had the 25-year anniversary. Really nice. We had Michael Shanks on site, but the site's buzzing. We've got a lot of work on, and I think we're feeling like that headwind that we've had in the sector for the last couple of years, we feel like it's becoming a little bit of a tailwind as we go into 2026.
I suppose a good place to finish was, I noticed on one of the sessions you chaired, you were picking on people, asking them what their Christmas wishes were and that sort of thing. So, yes, I mean, we've already covered highlights from 25, but yes, if you could have one ask, if you were in the room with Ed Miliband or somebody at the moment, what would you be urging them to do?
All right. I think that's quite obvious for me. Having come in from other sectors, my observations about offshore wind is I think sometimes innovation gets a little bit confused and muddled. I try and bring that to life a little bit. I think there's a huge amount of interventions in offshore wind around supply chain, and we're at an event now. You've heard GB Energy's announcements, obviously Offshore Wind Growth Partnership, and a lot of innovation happens within individual companies, and you can support that through supply chain programs. But there are some monster innovation challenges that won't be solved within the four walls of one company. And if you go and look at how aerospace does this, how automotive does it, how defence does it, there's a lot more pre-competitive collaborative innovation that's done, where public-private sector come together and they prove out not just a 5-10% increment improvement, but a massive disruptive innovation step. And I think if Ed was here, same comments I've said probably quite consistently this year, is we need to have both of those two things. Let's carry on doing all the amazing supply chain stuff, and we're seeing the amazing companies that are coming through, and let's steroid inject a little bit that disruptive innovation, because that's what's going to make us competitive compared to other parts of the world when we've got global organisations looking at where to inward invest or where to pre-route capabilities. And I think if you look at the industrial growth plan, it's very clear what are some of those big innovation gaps we need to solve. And that's why I'm really passionate. I think what Catapults are born to do is get right into the middle of those really difficult innovation challenges and come up with some game-changing technology.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think cables is probably somewhere I'd really like to focus on in 2026.
And after a big AR7, we should probably talk about that as we're on the eve of results in January. But one of the other messages from this morning was it's all about the projects. There won't be a supply chain if we don't get the pipeline. So, like most people in that room, you would like to see a big AR7.
I would. I think the project demand's really critical. I also do feel that you need to have that innovation bit alongside it. So I think if we just go with the demand, I think we'll still miss out on some of the big prizes in this sector. Why do we have Airbus manufacturing in the UK? Why do we have Boeing? Their only manufacturing facility in Europe is in the UK. There's a reason for that, and it's to do with that disruptive innovation. And I think that's where my passion is for this sector.
The Renews podcast was produced and edited by me, Stephen Dunn. Click subscribe wherever you get your podcasts to make sure you never miss an episode. For more exclusive market intelligence on the renewable sector, see renews.biz.